In the long, incredible story of India's fight for freedom, you have heroes that everybody knows and celebrates. But then you have the legends, the ones whispered about with this mix of awe and, honestly, a whole lot of mystery. Today, we're diving deep into the story of a man who is absolutely in that second category. A man whose voice could literally forge armies, whose sheer will shook an empire to its very foundations, and whose final days, well, they remain one of history's greatest unsolved riddles. This is the story of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose.
And that really is the question at the heart of it all, isn't it? I mean, think about it. At a time when the British Empire was this global superpower, its authority seemed absolute. How does one man, from a town called Cuttack, look at all that power and decide, nope, not only is resistance possible, it's the only way forward? It's an incredible story of courage, of unbelievable sacrifice, and of a rock-solid belief in one single idea, a free India.
And right here, in his own words, you get the key to his entire mindset. For Bose, freedom wasn't something you politely ask for. It wasn't a deal you could negotiate with the British. No, for him, it was a fundamental right that had to be taken. It was a victory that had to be earned with blood, sweat, and struggle. And that belief, right there, is what set him apart from so many others and put him on a collision course with pretty much everyone, both British and Indian.
Now, to really get who the revolutionary was, you first have to understand the scholar. See, Bose wasn't born into a life of rebellion, not at all. In fact, he was born into a life of privilege, a life with a clear path that was supposed to lead him right into the very heart of the system he would one day try to tear down.
He was born back in 1897. His father was a respected lawyer, his mother was deeply spiritual, and Subhash himself was this brilliant, thoughtful kid. But the real spark, the thing that ignited the fire in him, was the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. This idea of spiritual growth combined with selfless service to your country, it just clicked for him. The belief that serving your nation was the highest form of worship became his North Star. It completely changed his life's ambition from, personal success to national freedom. And the first big explosion happens at Presidency College. There was this British professor, E.F. Oaten, who was apparently infamous for his racist insults against Indians. After he got physical with some students, Bose got involved in the protests. Now, whether he was directly involved in the fight that followed is debated, but here's the key part. He refused to snitch on his fellow students. He took responsibility. And for that, he was expelled. This was a huge turning point. It taught him a lesson he never forgot. You don't earn respect by being obedient. You earn it through resistance. The sheer scale of his sacrifice really hits you when you look at the life he could have had. His parents sent him to England hoping he'd join the Indian Civil Service, the ICS, which was basically the steel frame that held up the British Raj. And he didn't just scrape by, he aced the exam, ranking 4th. This was a golden ticket, a guaranteed life of power, money, and status. But as he was about to accept it, he just couldn't shake this one question. How could I serve the British crown when my own country is in chains? So in 1921, he made his choice. He resigned. That single act of walking away from it all, that was the real start of his journey.
So he comes back to India, right? And he doesn't just dip his toes into the freedom struggle. He dives headfirst into the deep end. He joins the Indian National Congress and almost immediately becomes a rising star. But that rapid rise was about to expose a deep, fundamental crack running right through the independence movement itself.
I mean, you couldn't deny his talent. He found a great mentor in Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das, and he quickly became a skilled leader and organizer. He became the mayor of Calcutta, where he was super effective, pushing for social reforms and improving city services. His popularity just skyrocketed. By 1938, he'd reached the very top of the party, elected president of the Indian National Congress. He was a national leader, no question about it.
But this is where the trouble starts. At the time, the Congress was completely dominated by Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. On one hand, you had Gandhi, who preached ahimsa, or total nonviolence, and wanted a slower path to maybe dominion status first. On the other hand, you had Bose. He was a pragmatist. He respected Gandhi, but he believed in using any means necessary, including an army, to achieve one goal, Purna Swaraj, complete and immediate independence, no compromises. He saw a future India that was strong, industrial, and socialist, standing on its own 2 feet.
The whole thing just blew up in 1939. Bose actually ran for re-election as Congress president and won, beating Gandhi's own chosen candidate. But the internal politics became impossible. The party's old guard, totally loyal to Gandhi, basically refused to work with him. So rather than compromise his core beliefs, Bose resigned. He walked away from the presidency and started his own party, the Forward Bloc. This was more than just a political tiff. It was a fundamental parting of ways. It was his decision to carve out a new, more radical path to freedom.
Now, with World War II breaking out, the British were seriously worried about Bose. They saw him as a dangerous radical, so they put him under strict house arrest in Calcutta, thinking they could just silence him. They could not have been more wrong. What happened next wasn't silence. It was one of the most daring, most legendary escapes you'll ever read about.
Picture this. One night in January 1941, disguised as an insurance agent named Mohammed Ziauddin, Bose just walks out of his house. He's driven to a remote station, catches a train to Peshawar, and then, with help from his network, makes this unbelievably treacherous journey by foot and truck across the mountains into Afghanistan. From there, he navigates the crazy politics of the time, finally making his way to Germany. Every single step of this journey could have gotten him caught or killed. It's just a testament to his sheer nerve. And then, the silence was shattered. From a radio station in Berlin, his powerful voice crackled across the world and reached millions back home in India. Can you imagine the shock, the absolute thrill of hearing that? The man the British thought they had locked away for good was now on the world stage calling for a revolution. He had officially transformed from a national politician into an international revolutionary leader. So why Germany? Well, Bose was a firm believer in the old saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." His whole plan was to work with the Axis powers, not because he believed in their ideology, let's be clear about that, but simply because they were fighting the British. This strategy was all about one thing, building his life's greatest dream, an army to liberate India. By 1943, the focus of the war had shifted. To really lead the fight, Bose needed to be in Asia. So he set off on another journey that sounds like something out of a spy thriller, a 3-month voyage in a German U-boat. In the middle of the Indian Ocean, he transferred to a Japanese submarine, a move that had never been done before, and finally made it to Japan. This was an incredibly dangerous trip through enemy-patrolled waters, a risk that, frankly, no other world leader would have dreamed of taking. And what was waiting for him in Southeast Asia? This number, 40,000. 40,000 soldiers. These were mostly Indian prisoners of war that the Japanese had captured, plus thousands of civilian volunteers from Indian communities all over the region. And under his electrifying leadership, this ragtag group was molded into a disciplined fighting force, the Indian National Army, or the Azad Hind Fauj. But the INA was so much more than just an army. Bose set up a proper provisional government of free India. It had its own cabinet, its own currency, its own civil laws. It was a government in exile, and it was recognized by 9 countries. He formally declared war on the British Empire, and then he did something truly revolutionary. He created the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, one of the very first all-female combat units in modern history. He gave his army a powerful battle cry, Chalo Dilli, on to Delhi, and a greeting that still echoes across India today, Jai Hind. So, the army is formed, the government is in place, the stage is set for the final act, the march to Delhi. The INA, fighting alongside the Japanese, launched their attack into British India. What happened next was a moment of pure triumph, followed almost immediately by heartbreak, and then one of history's most persistent mysteries. This was it. This was the moment they had all been dreaming of. As part of the push towards Imphal and Kohima, soldiers of the INA crossed the border and planted the Indian flag in Moirang, Manipur. For the first time in almost 2 centuries, a piece of Indian land was free, governed by Indians, under the flag of a free India. It was a hugely symbolic and emotional victory, really the high point of their entire campaign. But that victory was tragically short-lived. See, the INA's fate was completely tied to the fortunes of World War II. And as the tide turned against Japan, supplies for the INA were completely cut off. The brutal monsoon rains came, turning the jungles into a nightmare of mud, disease, and starvation. Against impossible odds and a much stronger Allied force, the INA's heroic march came to a halt. The dream of marching into Delhi was over. With Japan's surrender, Bose knew he had to find a new ally. Maybe the Soviet Union. So on August 18, 1945, he got on a Japanese bomber in Taipei. The official story, which comes from the Japanese, is that the plane crashed right after takeoff. They claimed Bose suffered terrible burns and died in a hospital later that night. But there was no body ever recovered. No official death certificate, no photos, just a lot of conflicting stories from the supposed witnesses. And right there, the legend and the mystery truly began.
So, did Subhas Chandra Bose die in that plane crash? Or did he pull off one last great escape, disappearing into the shadows to continue the fight? You know, the mystery of his death has often overshadowed the incredible power of his life. But his legacy isn't really about how he died. It's about what he lived for.
And the mystery lives on, partly because the Indian government's own investigations have been all over the place. Look at this. 3 separate commissions looked into it over the years. The first 2, the Shah Nawaz Committee and the Khosla Commission, both said, yep, he died in the crash. But then, the most recent one, the Mukherjee Commission, which finished its work in 2005, came to a completely different, shocking conclusion. Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose did not die in that plane crash. The government rejected those findings, which means the question is still officially unanswered, leaving room for all kinds of theories.
But here's the crazy part. You could argue that Bose's greatest victory came after the war was over. The British decided to put the captured INA soldiers on trial for treason at the Red Fort in Delhi to make an example of them. Well, it backfired, big time. The entire country exploded in protest, defending the INA soldiers as patriots. But the most critical part was the mutinies that broke out in the Royal Indian Navy and Air Force. Indian soldiers, the very foundation of British rule, were refusing to fight their own people. The British looked around and realized the game was up. They couldn't trust their own army to control India anymore. The foundation of the empire had just crumbled beneath their feet. And this really brings us to his true legacy. It's almost like Bose knew this would happen. He understood that his own life was less important than the idea he was fighting for. The INA might have lost the battle on the field, but their story, their sacrifice, and those trials, they inspired a whole nation. They proved to the British that their time was finally over. The idea of total, uncompromising freedom had done exactly what he predicted. It had incarnated itself in millions of lives.
Subhas Chandra Bose never got to see a free India with his own eyes. But his spirit, his incredible courage, and his unwavering belief in what his nation could be played a massive role in making it happen. He gave India a vision of strength, a powerful salute, and a legend that continues to inspire people to this day. Jai Hind.